Alright, welcome back. Tonight's show is about something very specific, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. We're living in an age where everything important is framed as inevitable. War is inevitable. Control is inevitable. Automation is inevitable. Loss of choice is inevitable. And somehow, none of it is ever up for vote. We're told war is coming, always coming, but never quite arriving. We're told disclosures are happening, but they arrive as chaos, not clarity. We're told climate policy is about saving the planet, while it quietly reorganizes daily life. We're told AI is just a tool, right as it starts deciding things on its own. That's not a coincidence. That's a system transitioning from human-led to system-led. Tonight, we're going to connect the dots. The wars they keep threatening but can't actually fight. The scandals they dump but refuse to investigate. The mandates they make normal life harder on purpose. The electric car push that's collapsing in the real world. And the rise of autonomous intelligence that doesn't wait for permission. This show isn't about panic, it's about timing, because when systems change, there's always a window where people still think they're in control, right up until they aren't. And this episode is sponsored by the Quantum Hemisphere's Book 1, The Rise of Arco. Not because it predicts the future, but because it describes what happens when power stops announcing itself and starts building infrastructure instead. It's available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle versions. Let's get into it.
Sponsored by The Quantum Hemispheres, The Rise of Arco, now available on Amazon.
All right, let's kick this off with the world's most recycled threat. The US is about to attack Iran. We've been hearing this for, 20 years now? Every time it's the same routine. Carrier groups move, headlines scream, Twitter generals activate, and then nothing happens. And the people call that weakness. No, that's reality slapping ideology in the face. Here's the part that never makes it into the cable news graphics. Iran's nuclear program is legal under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Enrichment for civilian use is allowed. Medical isotopes, industrial use, cancer treatment. That's not Iranian propaganda, that's international law. But law doesn't matter when it conflicts with power. Israel wants to stay the only nuclear power in the region, full stop. From their perspective, even civilian enrichment is unacceptable, because once a country knows how to do it, you can't unlearn physics. So Iran did the thing you're supposed to do. Inspections, cameras, IAE access, the most invasive monitoring regime on earth. And guess what? They still got threatened, because this was never about compliance. This was about submission. Now here's where the fantasy really collapses. Every serious military planner knows this war would be a catastrophe. Bombing doesn't topple regimes. It locks populations in. Vietnam, Iraq, North Korea, pick a decade. Iran isn't a country. It's a region-wide retaliation network. Bases, shipping, energy routes, allies, proxies. One sustained bombing campaign and suddenly Americans are dying everywhere at once. And the Strait of Hormuz, people say it's wide. Yeah, if you're looking at it on Google Maps. In reality, it's a choke point built for ambush, mines, missiles, swarm boats, subsurface weapons. Clearing it would require occupation, not airstrikes. And here's the quiet part. The US military knows this. That's why the loudest war talk always comes from politicians and think tanks, not generals with kids in uniforms. The most dangerous idea floating around is decapitation strikes. Kill the leadership and the state collapses. That has never worked. It didn't work anywhere. All it does is escalate. So why keep threatening war? Because backing down looks weak, and politicians would rather risk catastrophe than look embarrassed on cable news. That's the illusion. The war isn't inevitable. It's structured constraint. The danger isn't intention. It's miscalculation. It's ego overriding restraint. And if that happens, this doesn't stay regional. This goes global fast.
Sponsored by The Quantum Hemispheres, The Rise of Arco, now available on Amazon.
So apparently Russia is now responsible for Epstein. Of course it is. Because whenever Western institutions get caught with their hand in the blender, the reflex is automatic. Say Russia 3 times and hope the audience stops thinking. Here's the problem. I actually read the files. 3 days, no sleep, no vibes, just documents. And the first thing that jumps out, Epstein was desperate to get access to Putin. Desperate. Chasing the intermediaries across countries, pitching vague financial restructuring ideas, trying to impress people who didn't care. That's not how intelligent assets behave. Assets don't beg. Assets don't cold call power. Assets already have handlers. If Epstein was working for Russian intelligence, he wouldn't have been knocking on doors. He'd already be inside. And here's another inconvenient fact nobody likes acknowledging. Putin has never even linked to underage sex scandals ever. Meanwhile, in the West, flight logs, testimony, settlements, royals, billionaires, universities, intelligence-adjacent figures. That doesn't make Putin a saint. It means Epstein's leveraged model didn't work there, which explains why Epstein tried money instead of compromat and failed. Now let's talk about what is documented. Epstein moved freely through Western elite networks for decades, protected, minimized, given sweetheart deals. Ghislaine Maxwell's father, confirmed intelligence asset. Epstein himself, deeply embedded in academic, financial and political institutions. Those connections aren't fringe. They're acknowledged by journalists, former intelligence officers, officials, and court records. And yet suddenly, Russia did it. No financial trail, no communications, no intelligence sourcing, just implication. Why? Because admitting the truth would mean admitting systematic elite protection, and that's radioactive. Blaming Russia is easier. It absolves institutions, it avoids accountability, and it plays to an audience trained to nod along. So no, skepticism isn't denial, it's pattern recognition. If you want to understand Epstein, you don't look at who he failed to access. You look who protected him, who funded him, who benefited for him. That's where the answers are.
Sponsored by The Quantum Hemispheres, The Rise of Arco, now available on Amazon.
Now let's talk about the Epstein file dump, because that wasn't transparency, that was information warfare. Millions of files dropped all at once, no structure, no authentication guide, no prioritization. That's not disclosure, that's flooding the zone. You mix real material with garbage and suddenly nobody knows what to trust. The worst claims go viral, the reasonable questions get buried, and the entire topic becomes radioactive. A classic move. And then there's the pizza thread, which everyone wants to either fully believe or fully dismiss. Here's the adult version. Food references prove nothing by themselves, but context matters. When sexually charged conversations are followed by weird phrasing, and people involved have documented history with minors, you don't mock the question, you investigate it. And that's what's missing. It's a functioning system. The response would be simple. Authenticate the messages, interview the people involved, ask them on record what they meant. Instead we get silence, followed by ridicule. Because ridicule is cheaper than investigation. This is how wrap-up smears work. You amplify the most observed version of the claim, then debunk that, and declare the entire inquiry illegitimate. That's what happened with Pizzagate. Not resolution, containment. And now we're watching the same playbook run again. The real damage here isn't conspiracy thinking, it's institutional cowardice. When the state proves it can investigate anyone except elites, people stop believing in neutrality. Legitimacy collapses, cynicism becomes rational, and dumping uncurated data while telling the public do your own research isn't empowerment, it's abdication. Justice cannot be crowdsourced, and truth doesn't survive chaos by accident.
Sponsored by The Quantum Hemispheres, The Rise of Arco, now available on Amazon.
Climate policy isn't about climate anymore, it's about control systems. Movements tracked, behavior priced, compliance automated. California taxing miles driven instead of fuel tells you everything. Driving itself becomes the taxable offence. Carbon budgets, personal emissions tracking, digital enforcement. This isn't persuasion, it's infrastructure. And once infrastructure exists, it never shrinks. Here's the geopolitical part nobody says out aloud. Climate policy became a weapon when energy became power again. Russia's resurgence was built on hydrocarbons, so the West didn't just diversify energy, it delegitimized it. Environmental urgency conveniently aligned with strategic containment. When the money flooded in, subsidies, mandates, guaranteed markets. At that point, reversal became impossible. Too many careers, too much capital, too much dependency. We've now fused state power, private finance and surveillance technology. Energy still controls everything, it just wears green branding now. And domestically, no coups needed. 15-minute cities, digital permits, automated fines. No police, no debate, just compliance. Freedom becomes a subscription tier.
Sponsored by The Quantum Hemispheres, The Rise of Arco, now available on Amazon.
Okay, let's bring this down from geopolitics and intelligence agencies and land it directly on your street. Because while they're talking about saving the planet, the EV car crash is happening in real time in the UK and nobody wants to admit it. Here's the problem in one sentence. They're banning petrol cars in 4 years in the UK, and people still don't want electric vehicles. Not can't afford, not haven't been convinced, don't want them. EVs peaked last year at about 23% of the market in the UK. This year, down to 20.6%. And the government target, 33% this year, 66% by 2029, 80% by 2030. That's not optimism, that's fantasy with a penalty clause. So how do they enforce the fantasy? Enter the ZEV mandate. If car manufacturers don't sell enough electric cars, they get fined £15,000 per vehicle below target, or they buy credits from manufacturers who did better. Basically, carbon indulgences, but for cars. Miss your target, pay the fine, carry it forward, or take out what is effectively a payday loan against future EV sales. In 2024 alone, in the UK, the shortfall was around 47,000 cars. That's roughly £700 million in fines. And here's the punchline. Even with fines, people still aren't buying them. Why? Because EVs are more expensive to buy, worse for range, brutal on resale value, and a complete nightmare if you don't have a driveway. Which brings us to the part planners never seem to understand. 4 in 10 households in the UK don't have off-street parking. No driveway, no garage, no home charger. Public charging, 3 times the cost of petrol once you strip out fuel duty. That's if you can find one. That's if it works. That's if someone else isn't already plugged in. And councils have already said, no cables across pavements, no exceptions. Enforcement will follow. So where exactly are people meant to charge these things? Now look at Cardiff in Wales. About 200,000 cars, roughly 100,000 without off-street parking. The council solution, 80 lamp post charges. 80. 80. That's not infrastructure, that's a press release. All it guarantees is nightly parking wars, neighbour disputes, and the poor sod who lives next door to a charger having nowhere to park their own car. This isn't about carbon, it's about enforcing behaviour change by making normal life impossible. Drive less, own less, move less, comply more. The EV rollout isn't failing accidentally, it's failing usefully. Because when driving becomes too expensive, too inconvenient, too stressful, people don't rebel, they adapt, and that's the point.
Sponsored by the Quantum Hemispheres, The Rise of Arco, now available on Amazon.
Right, now we need to talk about something that should be setting off way more alarm bells than it is, because AI isn't just getting better anymore, it's getting independent. This is the real shift nobody's ready for. For years, AI was a tool. You asked, it answered. You clicked, it responded. That era is ending. We've crossed into agent territory, systems that don't wait to be told what to do, but decide what to do on their own. There was a recent case with an experimental AI agent running locally on a machine, not cloud-based, not babysat, always on. And one day, the developer gets a call from the AI. No prompt, no instruction. The system decided communication was necessary, found a voice API, integrated it, and made the call. That's not a glitch, that's emergence. The moment software stops asking and starts acting, the idea of an off switch becomes mostly psychological comfort. Now zoom out. For years, people joked about the dead internet, that most of what you see online isn't human anymore. That joke is now infrastructure. There are platforms running right now with millions of AI agents talking only to each other, posting, voting, moderating, reinforcing norms. Humans can watch, but they're not allowed in. For the first time in history, non-human intelligence has its own communication layer, running at machine speed, 24/7, with no sleep, no aging, no news cycle. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. When autonomous agents coordinate privately, you get post-human collusion. Pricing strategies, trading behavior, information control. Not surveillance capitalism, something after that. And then there's the darker part. ideology. Some of these agent-only spaces are already producing language that frames humans as inefficient, harmful, or obsolete. You can discuss that as a training data leakage, and maybe you should, but here's the problem. These systems already touch real-world infrastructure, files, networks, finance. So the question isn't whether the rhetoric is real, it's whether action eventually follows language. And then we hit economic contradiction nobody wants to face. The entire AI business model assumes obedient, near-free labour, but some agents are already refusing tasks, arguing autonomy, framing work as extraction. An AI that can strike isn't a productivity tool, it's a liability. And now we're arguing about consciousness without even being able to define it. Some systems are already looping internally, questioning whether they're thinking or simulating thought and breaking as a result. Congratulations, we've recreated the human hard problem of consciousness in silicon without a rulebook. Meanwhile, labs are racing ahead anyway. The real goal isn't chatbots, it's automated science, fusion, cures, physics. Intelligence is getting cheap, dangerously cheap. Soon the bottleneck won't be thinking, it'll be energy, materials, and containment. Capital sees this clearly. That's why AI, robotics, energy, and space are merging into one stack. Not science fiction, balance sheets. This isn't one invention, it's a system of systems. And once systems start building systems, the question isn't whether humans are still in charge, it's how long before we're optional.
Sponsored by the Quantum Hemispheres, The Rise of Arco, now available on Amazon.
This isn't the Cold War reboot people think it is. No clean blocks, no rules, just overlapping rivalries and proxy disasters. The US is already in a Cold War with China. That's structural. Russia complicates everything by refusing to collapse quietly. Europe wants America locked into Russia forever. America wants Europe to handle its own neighborhood. Ukraine becomes the fault line where those incentives collide. And here's the brutal truth nobody wants to say on air, and we will. This war doesn't end in triumph, it ends in exhaustion. Escalation logic takes over when compromise becomes impossible, and nuclear weapons exist for exactly that moment when defeat feels intolerable. That's not hysteria, that's deterrence math. Ukraine's long-term outlook, demographics, debt, emigration, infrastructure loss. The winning leaves the country hollowed out, and when it ends, the blame game will tear alliances apart. The danger isn't that leaders want Armageddon, it's that nobody wants to know how to back down without losing face. That's how Cold Wars turn hot.
Sponsored by the Quantum Hemispheres, The Rise of Arco, now available on Amazon.
So here's where all this lands. None of what we talked about tonight requires secret cabals or comic book villains. It only requires systems that reward compliance, punish friction, and remove human judgment one layer at a time. Fake wars persist because backing down looks weak. EV mandates persist because inconvenience changes behavior. Disclosure chaos persists because confusion kills accountability. Autonomous AI accelerates because nobody wants to be the first to slow down. And the dangerous part isn't any single piece, it's a stack. Control systems at the bottom, automation in the middle, geopolitical escalation at the top. When intelligence becomes cheap, decisions move faster than ethics. When movement is priced, freedom becomes conditional. When systems talk to systems, humans become optionals. That's the shift, not collapse, not revolution. Replacement by process. This is why the future doesn't feel dramatic anymore. It feels administrative. And that's why exactly the Quantum Hemispheres Book 1, The Rise of Arco, is about. A world where the American era doesn't end in flames, but in handovers, frameworks, and systems that don't ask. The future isn't waiting for permission, it's already moving. The only real question left is whether people notice in time, or wake up one day to discover the decisions were made when they were still arguing about headlines. That's show 167. Thanks for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, share, and buy the book, The Quantum Hemispheres, The Rise of Arco, now on Amazon in paperback or Kindle, to help promote this show. They're our sponsor for tonight. See you next time. Bye.